With the uprisings that are happening around the country, organizations, groups, activists are putting very clear demands on politicians. As we know too well, most of the big cities in which we are having these issues with police departments and police unions are led by Democrats. Many of them almost solely Democrats. In New York in particular, we have a Democratic mayor who just went through budget cuts and was basically there protecting police unions, and activists are outraged. They have put forward several different types of demands. Our next guest is Awkward, a lifelong social justice activist. He's a 20-year abolitionist, and he is the co-founder of 10 Demands and co-creator of 10 Demands for Justice, The Road to Abolition. Thank you so much for joining us and for putting this forward. Tell us a little bit about the 10 Demands.
So as it relates to the efforts to defund NYPD, this actually takes it a step further in a number of ways. The biggest thing is that this is national. We have specific demands that are, comprehensively outlined, that are requests in a lot of ways for long-term solutions, but also immediate demands that we expect to happen right away. And mostly at the federal, the state, and municipal levels. So in that way, it differs in that it's not just targeting a specific city, but also beyond that, we're not speaking of simply defunding, cutting it by $1 million. We want to start with defunding. That's kind of the bottom line. And then it goes a step further. That's why it's called the road to abolition, because in addition to ending discriminatory policing and mass incarceration, at the end goal is to actually create a new system and a new society based on mutual aid and community, where we don't need police, we don't have police, and we don't need prisons or have prisons.
You have a great coalition as I look at the website here, several friends of the movement. You have, quote from Angela Davis of all people. How did you build this coalition? Can you talk a little bit about who is part of the coalition?
Sure. Well, just to clarify, I have not had contact with Angela herself. She's someone that I have for a long time looked up to. Her book, Are Prisons Obsolete, is kind of what started this all for a lot of abolitionists. And her work that preceded that as well. So we are kind of working off of what she has spoken about for years, as well as a number of other Black leaders and Black women in particular who are greatly impacted by policing and by mass incarceration, and who have led this abolitionist movement for decades. The coalition itself kind of started organically at the end of May. As you said, I've been doing this for many years. I was part of a program where I spent a lot of time at Green Haven Maximum Security Prison, meeting with incarcerated people and exchanging ideas. I successfully lobbied for the repeal of the Rockefeller drug laws in New York, where you and I both live. But the group itself is really a collection of leftist activists. And someone approached me with the concept, and that individual ended up kind of backing away because she wanted to limit it to defunding at most. And I was a strong proponent of taking it, that, like I said, the step further to full abolition. And so it ended up being 12 of us who for weeks worked on iteration after iteration, consulting with leaders from the Black community, the indigenous community, other abolitionists that I know, to develop these 10 demands. And we continue to work together today, both to promote it. We're currently working on printing a massive amount of flyers, which we're then going to distribute across the nation, targeting some specific key cities first, to get them in the hands of protesters, to kind of give them something to talk about and to, some strategy to put behind their anger and their need for justice.
No, I mean that's it's actually brilliant. I mean, so much of what came out of the movement was initially it was confusion over like what should we put forward? How do we? I think for a lot of folks, there's a sensitivity to criticizing Democrats and putting pressure on Democrats because in many cases, many of the organizations that probably would have taken the lead on this are intrinsically tied to these Democrats in the city. They are in these cities. They're fighting for budget reforms on different items. They're working with them. They're endorsing them. They're helping them with their campaigns in many cases. And it's been there have been so many roadblocks and stumbles along the way because the folks that we would normally go to for leadership on this and organizing, and they've got the membership to disperse this information, are just kind of sitting there with their hands tied.
Yeah. And, in a lot of ways, it doesn't surprise me because, while we have a number of really fantastic endorsers who are running or have run as part of the Democratic Party, they are true progressives. And the majority of the Democratic Party is not. Part of the system of mass incarceration, is a profit motive. That's why it's called the the prison industrial complex. And these same corporations that are profiting both off of private prisons, but one thing that people don't even know about is profiting off of state and federal prisons as well through slave labor at 4 cents an hour, as well as providing food and clothing and bed sheeting or whatever to prisons. These same corporations are the ones whose lobbyists are lobbying congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle and who are donating in large amounts to their campaigns. So we are not looking for the traditional forms of leaders or leadership to help us with this, although we're hoping that the Democrats would be the first to kind of adopt it in the way some of these more progressive leaders are. And we also are not expecting that reform, any type of reform, is going to be the solution. So typically, no matter what side of the aisle it's been on, it's been criminal justice reform. And time again, that hasn't worked. Abolition is about demolishing this system entirely and creating a new system that would, in a lot of ways, if we just decriminalized poverty, if we decriminalized immigration, if we decriminalized street crimes and crimes about use of public space, we would clear out prisons. If we removed or if we eliminated cash bail, tons of people who are catching COVID in jail right now would be home with their families and communities would be better off. So we're looking for, much more than just what Democrats or Republicans are willing to put on the table themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I ran for public advocate, we had so many criminal justice forums, and I talked to a lot of leaders in this space, including one who's actually, he helped advise our campaign on this, behind the scenes. He was talking to me quite a bit about this, was Janos Martin, who's running for DA in Manhattan. I was really kind of blown away with the resistance on some of like the most basic things, like releasing nonviolent elderly offenders who are taking up a majority of our prisons right now and are at absolutely no risk of being integrated back into society, especially if they're nonviolent. And, I mean, it's mind-blowing, like the cost it has on society, the cost it's on taxpayer costs, whatever. You want to frame it from whatever context you want to frame it to win the argument. But it just seemed like such an easy negotiation point.
Except for the fact that certain people want other certain people to remain in prison. In addition to the profit motive, there's just the reality of the fact that in the 19th century, much of the conversation around the Negro problem in dealing with slaves, the concept was shipping them back to Africa. Prisons in its modern sense was created right out of that. So that's still a primary goal, is to remove the people that they don't want to be around, that they don't consider equal to them, in a place where they're hidden and they're treated inhumanely, and they are profiting off of them. It's very clear that even though the term penitentiary comes from the concept of penitence, there is no actual purpose there for that, and there's no methods for rehabilitation. The stripping of prisons, from having access to Pell Grants is one example where we're not trying to educate these people so that they can come out. We want them to stay exactly as they are and as far away as possible. But it's interesting you mentioned Janos, because he is actually one of our endorsers. And he said, as a DA, like, it's really powerful for me to have, and us, I should say, to have someone like him endorsing it, because it shows that there is a possibility out there. Like, I hope we end up at a place down the road where the DA's office is not even necessary. But in the meantime, what he said today publicly was that he's happy to endorse, and he wants to start by ending the war on drugs. That's something that he would implement right away. And you're absolutely right about what you said about elderly people. In our 10th demand for ending carceral punishment, we say free everyone from jails, prisons, youth facilities, detention centers, but begin immediately with the elderly, the disabled, the immunocompromised, nonviolent offenders, and undocumented immigrants. Criminalize survivors. There's tons of women who are in prison for protecting themselves against their abusers. People who are there on bail and parole violations. People who are there for, being political prisoners. There are a ton of people who are not there because they're so-called dangers to our society. And this should be easy. But of course, there is this other reason. But we can go even further into, because the question is always, what about the rapists and the murderers? We have answers for that too.
Right, and it's you could look at many Nordic countries where their prison percentage wise to the population is very low, and it is like the most violent, dangerous members of society who, are on another level. Janos is great. He's been on their show. I think what's really inspiring about his campaign, especially in light of today's, as at the time of this taping, Ghislaine Maxwell was just arrested, and she's being tried, and we'll see how that goes. But, so much of that DA's office was protecting people like Ghislaine and Epstein and Harvey Weinstein. If we recall, Cy Vance, who's the Manhattan DA, I mean, it's just fascinating to see, like, how much is political in these offices. And we want to think that there's justice. We want to think, and we know that people who have access to funds are able to protect themselves, so much so that, like, with Epstein, like, he'd been tried before and convicted. He still, like, was, missing from his prison cell, like, flying to France, flying to wherever while he was supposedly serving time. I mean, our criminal justice system is a joke. Like, can we just be real here? It is a money-making machine for people who want to exploit people of color, and that's just flat-out racist.
Yes.
It's an economic model. As long as people like Harvey Weinstein are protected when they're so clearly and they've been documented as disgusting, dangerous, we won't talk about dangerous members of society, and people who were falsely convicted, were stop and frisked, were, all of the people that you mentioned their entire lives are being spent, producing things for cents an hour so they can buy an overinflated toothbrush in the commissary. Right. It's disgusting. It's not who we should be as a society. So I'm really happy that you put this together with a group of people, really great left activists.
Thank you very much. And, we are obviously going to continue to push for these changes. We're expanding our website every day to try to answer more of these questions, because, even when it comes to rape and murder, in a lot of cases, because they're poor, they have not been given access to, mental health treatment, for example. Also, even those who are just don't have mental illness, but for whatever reason are that certain way, there are a lot of reasons why our society is the way it is, and why people behave the way that they do. So our intention is, for 10 for Justice, focusing on, abolishing police and prisons to be the start of something larger. So 10 Demands is an organization that we created in the process of creating 10 for Justice. And we plan as an organization to extend it even further to talk about 10 demands for economic justice, 10 demands for education, 10 demands for public health, because as you said, this is not the society we want to live in. And we have the power. We are the people, the 99%. There is strength in numbers. And, that can be seen as a result of the general strikes and things like that, where if we don't shop, if we don't work, the country doesn't run. So it's just a matter of being informed and being on the same side and leveraging mutual aid. And with all of that, we can really make a difference.
This is awesome. How can people help out? What can they do?
There's a lot of different ways. We're open to adding more people to our working groups. If you have a particular specialty, whether it's education or public health or economics, you can always reach out to 10 Demands on Twitter or info@10forjustice.com. We have a GoFundMe right now, which is covering some of the costs of the flyer printing and distribution, and is also going to go toward our applying for nonprofit status. If you're interested in petitions, we do have a change petition to support this. If you're interested, you can endorse the 10 Demands on our website. And you can always reach out to me directly. I'm Awkward Rap, AWKWORD RAP on Twitter. And strike up a conversation, because the more communication we have, the more myths are dispelled and the greater the understanding is of what abolition truly means. We do have a solution for all of these questions. People just think that we want an anarchist society where everyone gets to run around without repercussions. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about stepping outside the prison box, thinking outside of that, and having different types of repercussions where people actually are held responsible to the parties that they harm, where we have intervention to prevent crime. This is not something where, this is not something that has not been thought about for decades. This is something that is certainly able to be implemented. It's just a matter of forcing it on the hands of our leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, people think this popped up overnight, and these are uprisings that have been in the works for decades. I mean, Absolutely. Generations, actually, if you really want to get down to it. Slave uprisings. Yep. Awkward, amazing work. Thank you for coming on. Keep us in the loop. And I'm hoping that some of these leaders start to step up, and bit by bit, they start to realize what's on the line here.
Thank you so much. With people like you helping amplify our message, we have a lot greater likelihood of having success. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks to Lynette Lopez of Business Insider and to Awkward the artist. Special thanks to our team, Dorsey, Kelly, and George, for making this show happen. We are growing little by little. Make sure to go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show to invest in our show so that we can keep this show going and going strong and do more exciting things as well. I'll see you guys next week back in New York. Stay safe, stay well, wear your masks.